Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the 24th August 2023 meeting of Civil Defence Emergency Group. Civil Defence Emergency Group Joint Committee meeting. And we'll open the meeting with a Mihi Karakia. Whakataka taho, whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga. Kia makina kina ki ota. Kia matatara matara ki tai. E hiki e anau te atakura, I teo, I hoka, I haho, tihe, Māori ora. Item of urgent business, the finance report. This item was not on the agenda as the final report was not available at the time of the agenda was distributed. This item cannot be delayed until a subsequent meeting, as the next meeting is taking place in November, and the information relates to the 22-23 fourth quarter, which needs to be received by the committee at this meeting. I'll call for apologies, and I have Nigel Bowen for lateness. All those in favour that we receive that apology, that I carried. Conflicts of interest on today's agenda. Public forum, deputations, petitions, none. Extraordinary and urgent business. As I said before, there's an extraordinary item of urgent business, which is the 2022 CDEM finance report, and we'll take this after our last report. So I'd like to move that we accept the. You accept it now. Yeah, that the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Joint Committee meeting is accepted. You mover for that? Yep. Second it. All in favour, please say aye. In fact, passed. And we'll take that as the last item. No notice of motion. Minutes of the meeting. That the minutes of the previous meeting on page 11 of your agenda. One addition to the minutes. Councillor Davies has requested his attendance to be noted in the minutes under in attendance. Do I have a move and a second that we receive that? Councillor Borton, Mayor Borton, Mayor Black, all in favour, please say aye. No other matters. We're moving on to the Civil Defence. Confirms that the minutes of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Joint Committee meeting held on the 1st of June 2023. Is there a mover and a seconder? And that's with the addition of Councillor Davies being listed as in attendance. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Sam Murray, all in favour? Oh, Sam Murray, thank you. Moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Just deal with Councillor Davies' request. He would like to be an observer on this committee. So just asking the members if they would be acceptable to that. As an observer, he could observe, would have no voting rights and could have speaking rights if asked. Is the committee happy with that? If so, we have a motion to say. Yeah, and Councillor Davies, would you like to speak as to why you would like to be an observer?
It was moved by the regional council at the end of last year. Obviously, John is our representative, and I was appointed by the regional council as permanent observer. It just I wasn't aware of this next process, but I thought the decision had already been had.
It's a decision the committee needs to make here. So if someone would like to move. Nigel, seeing that. Craig, Rowley, any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Report items. Recommendation. Civil Defence Emergency Management Joint Committee Resolution Status Report, page 23. James, speak to your report.
Sure. There's currently nothing that hasn't been completed there. So unless there are questions around completedness of any of these, but we believe they've all been completed.
Well done. Any questions of clarification? Any questions of clarification? Put the motion. We have a mover and a seconder. That's Murray. Sam. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 8.2, learnings from the North Island Severe Weather Civil Defence CDEM Joint Committee Report, page 28.
Thank you. I'll take the report as read, but we note here that there are 11 recommendations going forward from the learnings. Those learnings were gathered through surveys as well as the emergency management forum, so they're gathered up from our emergency managers. A lot of them are sort of business as usual things, and there's a lot in here that I think our region does well. For example, the first recommendation around sort of maintaining and practicing our communications between elected officials, our staff and chief executives as well is good, certainly better than what we saw in Auckland. So some of these things are sort of ongoing bits of work that we do. Others need to be turned into a bit of a program. And so for the next joint committee and the next coordinating executive group, I will come back with a plan of attack for these, including which ones are sort of, there'll be some that will actually have signed off by them. But happy to take any questions on any of the recommendations or any discussion.
Thank you, James. If there's questions there, one thing I'd like to bring up was the Whakatahi and the council and their roading. The roads are closed and the two lots of information not meshing, and it may be raised at the Road Transport Committee meeting after this meeting perhaps, but it needs to start here because there's a dislink, and it's been trying to be worked on but not much progress being made, I think, at this stage. So it needs to get to where it needs to get to, is be more useful than what it is. Yeah.
So I think Richard will pick this up in his report on the 2021 flooding, where we're working on this road issue. We're very, very close here in Canterbury to having each of the councils provide their roading data, so the local roading data, that we will be able to create a dashboard to see which roads, including the Whakakotahi managed roads, are open and closed, and the reasons why they're open and closed, and what that means for emergency services versus residents or other people wanting to travel those roads. It's all great having that. It's great for Canterbury, that it really needs to end up into a national place where travellers through Canterbury can actually see that and use it. And at the moment, when you've got things like Google Maps taking data from Whakakotahi's website to help travellers negotiate their way through our part of the land, if it's a local road that's closed, Google does not know that, and so we have people still trying to travel when we know those roads are closed. So we'll be able to provide a solution very, very soon here in Canterbury to show that. What we need to then encourage is Whakakotahi to put that onto their journey map. And at the moment, they've been saying they're not interested.
Hamish, you'll have to come up. Just wait for that to speak.
Sorry. We had the pleasure of the Minister of Civil Defence in our building the other day, and we did talk to them about progress that had been made in relation to the sharing of information. But the step that needed to be taken now is Whakakotahi actually displaying the information. So if you go on the council website, you'll get it. If you go on Whakakotahi's website, you don't. So we've made the Minister well aware of that. We've had James Cagle in the council chamber. We've made him well aware of it. So it's an issue that has visibility. It's just that we need someone to bang the last head together and get the solution through. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamish. John.
Thank you, Chairman, through you. The 11 recommendations, James, do you have any sense of how they might tie into some of the conversations that are happening within the review process? Is there a sense of some of the issues are raised versus what we've found out of that, without going into great detail? But our civil defence, our Canterbury review.
Yeah, so yes, as you'll all be aware, we've got KPMG reviewing us. I don't think that any of these particular recommendations will have a big impact on the review, but what the review might highlight is prioritising some of these as more urgent, easy things to achieve, as opposed to that more transformational stuff that might come through in the review.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. Yeah, my question's around how this fits into national learnings from particular events, and do the recommendations here align with things that everyone else is going to try and pick up as well, so that we're not just doing things that don't align with the national response to the things that we learn. And the second piece is there's some costs to these recommendations, and it might have been in your first introduction to this paper, but how are we going to prioritise which of these we do early and what the cost is going to be to make them happen?
I'll address the cost one first. So when I come back to next meeting with a plan, I'll have costs on there, and I'll include priorities as part of that planning. In regards to the bigger review, can that perhaps wait until NEMA and Rochelle and John Price get to talk about that, because it's sort of included there. But yes, there are national reviews into the response occurring, so that can get picked up then. Thanks, Sam.
Take it then, Sam. Murray?
Excellent. Thank you for the paper. I mean, I think the recommendations as written, need to feed into a bigger story. But I guess I was just reading recommendation 10, and that says that consideration might be given to support the local community. And I guess if we understand the recovery phase, or the immediate response, but then the recovery phase, the community will be the cavalry. They will be the people that will pick up initially, and then the experts will come in, but they will be left. And I suppose I was concerned that consideration be given may not have enough weighting in the context of the report. I guess that's my thought, that it perhaps, and I did read later on, it talks about some funding, and that might come through, James, as well, but it felt to me just a little bit light, that only to give consideration to that, because it's an integral part of managing. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree. It probably is light, and we need to. It came out of one of the parts in Auckland where a community-led centre was established, and then almost an official civil defence centre was established sort of beside it, and everyone was going to the community centre. So we've got to do some work regionally around how we support those community-led centres rather than compete with them. Yes.
And I think an example of that in Kaikoura Haranui was Takahanga Marae, where we went in and said, we need that, as opposed to going, what can you offer and what can you achieve? So I think that's all part of that conversation, how you utilise the community rather than impose or take from them. Yes.
Further questions for James? So I'll put the motion. There'll be opportunity for discussion then.
Sorry, just on Mia Murray's point, I think it's very valid. So before we come to moving that, can we give some consideration to what that word might be? Because I don't think that consideration is correct there either. It should be stronger. Just my brain's gone a bit slow. I can't think of what word should go in there, but it's certainly something stronger than that.
Smarter minds than Dean's. I don't think there's many. Change the word consideration to what? Mary, just will push you button.
Could it be as simple as that consideration should be given, or does that add more weight to it? I don't know. Does it? Well, thanks, John.
Difference between should and shall. Shall is absolutely, whereas should says it should happen, and the expectation is it will. So it does add that weight.
Which words would you like? Should, will? I think back to grammar at school, isn't it? Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, that one. That consideration should be given. Must. That on recommendation 10. There we go. So it's on the screen for number 10. Happy with that? So is there now a mover and a seconder? Dan and Marty. Any debate? No, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Next item is on page 36, independent review of CDEM group.
So the independent review is underway. KPMG was selected to undertake that review. There's been opportunities made for mayors, chief executives, emergency managers to talk to them. I know the date didn't work very well for a lot of people, but we did manage to, we've sort of offered that written correspondence could go through to them. Having said that, they feel very confident that they've got a good picture of thoughts from around the region on what CDEM should be focused on and should be doing. They've managed to speak to, there's a point 4 takes you through the stakeholder engagement. They have now, and Jamie, you might want to comment on this, they have spoken with Ngāi Tahu and 3 Runanga to get a Māori iwi view around CDEM. Going forward, there is a presentation that KEG members and joint committee members have been invited to on the 21st of September at Rolleston to receive the report and then to begin to think about implementation of it and the way forward. It's underway, and I suppose the initial comments that I've had back from KPMG seem to be both, as I was saying in that previous paper, some transformative stuff as well as some low-hanging fruit, if I can call it that we could achieve to improve our civil defence response through the region. But I'm happy to take any questions on the review if you've got any.
Questions? And then,
I can't see you with these on. We could just adjust. You've got iwi te Runanga as well, so you had the meeting with iwi, but also with mana whenua as well. I think it's really important that we get that wording right, because just it needs to be reflected not only here but also in the bill as well.
good, we'll adjust that to reflect what has happened. Yeah.
It went well. I was able to give the iwi perspective without being mandated to speak on behalf of Runaka, so it was great having Elizabeth and Carl Jackson from Aroha Whenua present in that. We were hoping to have Tuahuriri present, but they were unable to attend, and they've also expressed an interest to being able to chat, whether it's either with KPMG or with our group on at another time. And from the meeting, it was clear that Runaka were very happy with the relationships that they have with group and with their TAs, and I think they'd like that taken forward probably to a national level as well, just so that there's more more engagement and more visibility about who's actually going to be present during these upcoming events that we're going to experience. So sort of.
Great, good question.
The meeting on the 21st at Selwyn, is that going to have dial-in ability?
A bit more.
Yes, I think it will have. I'm pretty sure it's already got Teams and the invite now, and if it hasn't, I'll put it in.
That'll save you the trek down, right? More efficient use of time. Murray?
Can I just accept what you've just told us, James, in regard to the report, and I guess I'm a little bit concerned about on page 37 where it talks about KPMG meeting with mayors, and it says completed. Whilst I might have dropped the ball and perhaps haven't responded as such, I don't know that I had an actual opportunity to participate in that, given that I wasn't able to attend, given it's a council day. So I just think perhaps the accuracy that is written is probably not as true or reflective of the process.
I know I never had I wasn't, because I wasn't in the country when that was on, so I'm not sure how many other mayors have not had the contact. And just push your button.
When it says it's completed, I don't think that's reflective of the situation either, because I was unable to attend that meeting either, because it clashed with council meetings that day as well.
I'd like to I'd like to also support what Mia Mary said. I don't specifically recall receiving that date. Doesn't mean it didn't come in, but if it doesn't work for us, then KPMG should have been seeking another time, because we are busy, and just because it's a time that works for them doesn't necessarily mean it works for all. So that probably should have been sought, and perhaps an instruction could have been given back to them in that regard.
By the sound of it, not many mayors have had contact with CPMG, so perhaps we should start that process again for mayors so that we can be involved in the process.
I was just late in and Sam had to leave early, but myself, Phil and Sam were there, and it was really positive. I felt it was really good, wasn't it? It was good fun, actually.
I was the only one there, so they asked me all the questions.
How'd you go for us?
Yeah.
I hope the answers were good. Or should have been, but yeah. So it doesn't look as though many mayors have had input into it, which they should have. So we may need to kick that process off for those who weren't. Jamie?
Yeah, can I ask for the meetings with the mayors, was it face to face or online? Okay, got it.
Would you want a face to face or online's okay, Murray?
Oh, look, I guess for me, and I'm thinking that the 21st is actually going to recap the information and provide us that sort of opportunities to get up to speed. That's what I think is going to happen. I may be wrong, but it's perhaps not so much that I may not have been able to attend because of council, but actually it's just that I think what it reads in this report doesn't accurately reflect the process. And so I'm probably not seeking to to regurge that information because we are busy and sometimes our diaries don't align, but I just think how it's written here doesn't reflect fairly or truly the process.
Right, got that, so we can reflect that. But I'm just thinking of the mayors who did attend. Do you think if we had a meeting with the ones who didn't, it would add value? Or do you think you might have captured it?
Yeah, pretty hard to add any more value than what Sam, Phil and myself had.
I totally understand that not everyone can make every meeting.
No.
I'm sure there might have been some other things that people
Yeah.
would have said if you had been there. We were also given, I think this week, the opportunity, or last week, the opportunity to provide any extra feedback via email. The mayors are only one of many stakeholders that have fed back into this, and I'd be reluctant to push back the timing on that report back on the 21st, because we actually want to get onto the implementation of the improvement piece. So if there's an extension to allow people to give that extra feedback, that'd be great. But I think the 21st is about them hearing from the many stakeholders, not just us as mayors. And I agree with what Mari said, because her original point is really the papers being correct and truly reflecting what had happened, which is actually most mayors weren't engaged in that.
Correct.
So that doesn't feel like that part has been complete.
Correct. That's all I'm seeking. Yeah.
Giles?
I think just to support what Sam has said, the report back on the 21st is really for them to present their findings and their draft report. So there's an opportunity for Joint Committee and CAG to provide feedback. And obviously, if there's anything that is violent, people violently disagree with, then that would be reflected in the final report. Obviously, the report is for Joint Committee.
Okay, so there's two things there. One is the accuracy that most mayors weren't involved in that process as written in the paper. And the second one, we will not have another meeting, but we'll contribute when we meet at the 21st September and so on, if there's anything further. So
just in regards to that point 5 with saying completed, if I change the wording from completed but noting only 3 mayors attended, would that be okay? And I'll do the same for the chief executives, because there was also a limited amount of chief executives who could attend.
I think we're all in agreement there, so that's good. Great. And thanks, James. I'll move in a second for the motion. What the motion is, receives the update of the review of the Canterbury CDEM group. Move and a second for that. Nigel, Phil. Further discussion, debate? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. 8.4 C10 policy update on page 42.
Hopefully most of you are aware of this program. Some of you may not. C10 is our emergency support team program that we run in Canterbury, where council staff undergo a week-long extra training in emergency management, leadership and technical skills for working in the emergency operation centres to provide a capability to support each other when emergencies occur. It's been very successful. It's a very successful program. It was established in 2017, and the documentation has not been updated since that point in time. So this is about creating or updating that policy from a establishment policy to an ongoing and enduring policy going forward into the future. It's very much where the coordinating executive group support it and manage it. One of the things that they asked is that we add to it that the joint committee become champions for the program. So that's been added to the policy, and just want to make sure that you're comfortable with yourselves being champions within your council for being able to release staff and allow staff to attend the C10 program. I'd like to note one of the comments that came from the coordinating executive group, that there was a feeling that if we were able to run more courses and it worked from a staff time point of view, every single person that works in an EOC should go and do the course. It's that good. Obviously, there's constraints to doing that, but I think it's one very successful program that our region has been able to deliver.
Thanks, James. Questions? James, on the C10 policy update? None. Someone like to move that we receive the policy notes the role of the CDEM Joint Committee as champions for C10 program? Nigel? John? Any debate? I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Carried. Item 8.5, page 58. Which is introducing the draft CDEM Group Recovery Plan. And Richard.
Good koto, thank you very much. In November, I think I brought a paper to you highlighting that as a group we were very ill prepared for recovery, and this is a key part of our response to that. So it's a draft plan. The plan itself has no formal status. It's not part of the group plan. It's not like your district plans or so on. It's very much written as a discussion paper, and the aim is twofold. First of all, to enhance understanding of recovery and what it involves and the nature of it, because as we've seen in the North Island, that's not well understood. And secondly, to put forward a proposal in terms of how we might organise ourselves and run that recovery at the group level, and how that integrates with the local level. So that's the purpose of it. The next steps for this process are going around and having discussions with all our recovery partners, clearly including district councils as key recovery partners, but also wider than that. Also, all with government departments, NGOs, all the people who are involved in it, with the intention to try and build that understanding and incorporate any feedback we get into a revised version of it. Although I'm the primary author of the plan, there's nothing in there that I'm wedded to. What I'm wedded to is getting the best plan we can get, and any ideas to enhance it are welcome. those ideas don't need to come today, but what I'm wanting to do is go around and say individually each council. And one thing I'd just like to put in front of you, our original plan was to have a bit of a road trip and go around and meet with some as mayors and chief executives. The one I've had so far is down at Mackenzie, and that was actually a workshop format with all of council. So I've put that invitation to everybody. We're happy to come down and present, whether it's at a committee meeting or a workshop or however you want to have it. That invitation is there. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think when we discussed earlier that perhaps the recovery manager would also be in on that meeting when you come down. Our recovery managers, yeah. I think that's a good idea for to get around and to each council. Used to do it years ago, apparently. It's been dropped off a bit lately, but we'll bring it back. Yeah. And any questions, Murray?
Timing, will we be looking at a couple of hours or a half a day, or what's the workshop? Or what would we be likely to take? Sorry, through the chair.
Yeah. So Mackenzie was an hour. I'd say depending on what feedback you've got. Basically, as a format, as I gave a presentation and then going to open up to discussion.
Perhaps you could send out an invite to councils and try and align some different days for different councils. Yeah. Further questions?
Richard, can you just expand on the financial implications? The existing CDEM group financial reserves are inadequate to fund recovery at the moment.
So at the moment, we've got our $750,000 reserve. You know, in a major event, that would be gone very quickly. I've had a discussion recently with Giles around that, and the point that we've both agreed on, whether it's reserves or a drawdown facility, the point is that you need to be able to access funds quickly to get teams up and running, not for the all the massive things that actually need doing in terms of infrastructure repairs and so on, but actually just to establish a recovery office, engage suitably qualified property consultants to prepare business cases to government, and those sorts of activities. So as I say, that's something I've flagged with Giles, and I think we'll have some more discussions around that, about what that might look like.
Further questions, Richard? No, we've got the motion there, which approves the attached draft Canterbury CDEM Group Recovery Plan for engagement and discussion with the Canterbury Recovery Partners. So move in a second for that. Ben, Craig, Raleigh. Open for discussion, debate. Being none, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Carried, thank you. Item 8.6, NEMA Report. Rochelle, and we also have John Price in attendance today too. Welcome, John.
Kia ora tātou, nice to see you all. So Rochelle Pomalo, Senior Regional Emergency Management Advisor with NEMA. I think I've met most of you. And then alongside me, John Price, who is our Director, Emergency Management Deputy Chief Executive. So thanks for coming along, John, and just acknowledging the conversation we had at the last meeting. And there were some questions and an interest in John attending. So great to have you along. So I'll just sort of speak to the report briefly, and then there's an opportunity to ask some questions and let John provide a bit of an update as well. So the key points in the report, I will take it as read. The announcement of the government inquiry into the response to the North Island severe weather event, acknowledging that that is separate to the NEMA after action review, and also just acknowledging Mayor Broughton, your comment around how the Canterbury learnings are going to be fed back into obviously that broader picture. And point, I'll just highlight 17, notes that NEMA is going to lead a conversation across the CDEM groups. And this was to begin in July, August. It has not started yet, but it will be underway shortly. And as well as that, I have fed that information back through to the team that are coordinating that. And any further comments that I receive, I'm ensuring that I push them back. So they are being integrated into the conversations that are happening. And other than that, the emergency management bill, there are 72 days to make a submission, with submissions closing on the 3rd of November. So yeah, open to questions, or if you'd like to hear anything else from me, but otherwise I'll let John speak.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, it's great to be back home. Wonderful to see some familiar faces, and yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's been I've been in the position almost 6 months now, and there's a couple of things I wanted to talk to you around. One was obviously the bill is probably one of the best opportunities we have as a country to influence change in the emergency management space. Some key things that are happening within the bill is obviously ensuring that iwi and hapu are now part of emergency management, and how we will integrate that into our emergency management capability. Just on that, it was silent in the current legislation, so this is a really magnificent opportunity, and the wider community, because we know, and we've seen this in Auckland with our Pacific communities and also ethnic communities, how they contribute, and they are the true first responders a lot of the time. So opportunity around that. Some things that NEMA as an organisation are focusing on is the common operating picture. And it's one of the things that you struggle, and as executives of the Act and what happens here in Waidaha, it's important that we get a really good grip of what's looking like for a picture. What I mean by that is you cannot default to what's on the TV screen as your picture of what's happening. We need to be better and more sophisticated than that. So one of the challenges, we have 16 CDEM groups all operating independently with different systems. So looking to advance that in the future, that we can have a common operating picture, especially when it comes to a catastrophic event, which it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of, or not if, it's a matter of when that will occur. And alongside that is actually having a common operating model and a common operating platform. Various different CDEM groups have different platforms. It means they just can't talk to each other, and we can. And if you go across, and this is what we found with the Bush report in 14 different TLAs, and the inability to actually talk to each other across the sector, so in the system. So there's some opportunity there for us going further. The after action review that Rochelle spoke to is it's an internal thing that we're doing within NEMA. We are not going to be reviewing any of the CDEM groups at all, but when we work with the CDEM groups, that fact there is that gives us the ability for them to tell us how well we did or didn't go as a national organisation. We're very careful not to impede on the government review, but the government review, like I said, is probably another really good opportunity, like the bill, to actually influence change in emergency management. So we're seeing it as an opportunity to be factual, but also provide guidance as to how we could lift the system up. The national exercise will be happening midway through next year. It will be focused on the Transalpine Fault, and it's going to be another really good opportunity for us as a system and sector to actually see how ready we are across the whole of the country, not just South Island or Te Waiparama. So, and part of that, in my thinking at the moment as director, is to actually take it to the point of failure. Too often we exercise to the point of our own success, but you will not learn, and we won't be able to put things in place and truly see where our gaps are. To give you a bit of an understanding of what that looks like, and I know we know the Transalpine Fault situation really well, but the other things that sort of NEMA is focusing on is that catastrophic event. It's that one event that will bring New Zealand to its knees. And like I said before, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So to give you a bit of an idea, in the next 50 years, we know the Transalpine Fault is 75% chance that it will rupture. Ruapehu, Tongariro, Ngāhui, the White Island Eruptions, it's almost certain we'll have another one of those in the next 50 years. The Taranaki eruption, 30 to 40% chance that will erupt in the next 50 years. Hikurangi, the subduction zone of a magnitude 8 or more, there's a 10 to 30% chance that will rupture. And I think we all know what that'll look like as far as a tsunami is concerned. And I'll talk a little bit around those numbers. We're also the South America earthquake and New Zealand tsunami. There's probably a 50% chance that will occur in the next 50 years as well. So that's the threat offshore. And Auckland volcanic eruption, there's a 5% chance that will happen in the next 50 years. So if you take each of those singly, probably we can put our odds on there, combine them all, and not looking too flash. I don't know if you know that New Zealand, Lloyd's have just done an assessment on natural disasters and the worst places to live, most risk. Bangladesh is number 1, New Zealand's number 2. So we live in a beautiful country, but we live somewhere where the risk is huge for us for something to occur. So this is why the focus of NEMA is on catastrophic events. You know, the events that will happen in our district here, we can manage, and you've got really good capability. But that national thing that will bring us to our knees is the one thing that worries us. You know, if we look back to when we were all here with the Canterbury earthquakes in February 22, that was not a catastrophic event. It was an event that brought us to our knees in Canterbury, but it did not bring the country to its knees. So if you look at Cyclone Gabriel and the severe weather event, that was a flood where 15 people unfortunately lost their lives. That again was not a major catastrophic event. The reason that became a national state of emergency was because the system as such across the 14 TLAs couldn't cope. And that's why it became state of emergency. So just trying to get that into your thinking. So if and when Hikurangi fault eruptions, we're looking at, if there is a 70% evacuation capability, deaths, we'll be looking at 22,000. Injuries, 25,000. When I talk about injuries, they are major injuries, hospitalisation injuries. If there is 0 evacuations when the Hikurangi goes, we're looking at 68,000 dead and 32,000 walking injured. So the impact on us as a country is going to be huge. So we're doing a lot of planning at the moment as to what that'll mean. And at the moment, there is inability for us to actually score really well on our scorecard across all of our factors. However, that's something that we're working up. The reason I bring that to your attention is that's the one thing that keeps me up at night, but also gets me to work in the morning. So that's something that's where our focus is on. Other focuses for us is actually building the capability of the system. So NEMA have 3 functions: one, to be the steward of the system, to be the assurer, and a lot of what you do here is the assurance function, and also the operator. Key things that have been put in place and are operating reasonably successful is the Dart Buoy network that runs all the way through the Hikurangi. That's the early indicator of a tsunami coming to us. And we have a MAS centre that's been set up the last 12 months, and that's our monitoring, alerting and reporting centre. So that gives us the ability to identify risk and threats from tsunami, volcanic or earthquakes 24/7. We talked about we'll talk about recovery, but one of the key things is obviously the cyclone recovery unit has been stood up and funded. That will have a life at the moment of 2 years, and then once that has expired, then that will come back to NEMA to continue the recovery side of things there. So that's sort of my world at the moment, but thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, John. It's thanks for laying it on the table for us. Bangladesh number 1 and New Zealand number 2. Who's at the bottom of the list? Which country? What is the safest place?
Rugby, but all things here. The other thing that's just come up is just of interest too. The National Security Group have just done a survey. And this survey is all about national security, and we've all been through that, haven't we, with our terrorist threats and pandemic. So they've asked the question about New Zealanders as to where you sit as far as your major concern in the next 12 months. So number one for national security group was a national disaster. Before a counter-terrorism, a cyber attack, national security threat, a pandemic, 93% of New Zealanders are more concerned about a natural disaster than any other security threat to their country. So I think that, you know, that's the voters, that's the people that you represent, and they are saying that's their number one concern. And that's up 6% from last year.
And the key message out of that is for us to be ready, really. So, yeah, it's got some questions, John.
Thank you for that, John. It's we had that conversation at a TITAC with the EMOs, and everyone's sort of sitting there and looking at the numbers, and they are quite catastrophic when you look at it, and you're just not sure where the heck you would go with it when it happens. My question also, that in that conversation we were talking about, I guess, resilience funding for rivers and building back better and a bunch of things. We've had a conversation recently with DPMC on policy. They've talked about policy, but when I asked about resilience funding or talk about resilience itself, they go talk to NEMA or talk to someone else. So we have all these silos. Do you have any view, I guess, in NEMA at this point around resilience funding in preparedness as opposed to trying to put things back in place with Gabrielle or things like that?
No, John, very, very good point, and thank you for that. Look, it's a big one. The way New Zealand currently deals with major catastrophe or major events is we set up a unit, and we saw that, didn't we, after the Canterbury earthquakes when Sarah was set up, and now you got the cyclone recovery unit set up. When it comes to, you know, I'm a great believer in, at the moment, the legislation very much is a build back saying, you know, ideally we should be revisiting a lot of this funding, and I think it's opportunity under the Act and then the National Plan, as especially Section 33. You know, it's the whole thing about 60-40 funding. You know, that's really, and for a lot of our territorial local authorities, any major disaster or any flooding or anything really puts pressure on your infrastructure and your funding. There are a number of TLAs around the country that, and unfortunately, they are almost at the point of breaking with a funding regime. So the ability to really build back and build back better is quite minimal. I think it's a conversation we need to have. Section 33 needs to be revisited and actually brought back up. And a lot of these things are based on old modelling, not new modelling. You know, if you look at how many, in the last 6 years, there have been 40 declarations across Aotearoa, New Zealand. The 6 years earlier, I think there was something like 10. So that's a 400% increase. And if you look at everything else that's happening, and I outlined those sort of catastrophic events, but events are going to continue to happen. We know with global warming, it's going to continue. The cyclone season, the Metropolitan Met Service are telling us, is going to be longer, and it's going to come further down into New Zealand. So, you know, cyclones again. The major factor for New Zealand is landslides. You know, and many of your colleagues around the country are suffering. The landslides, unfortunately, New Zealand, and the way we put our infrastructure, it's cheaper and easier to put it along the geographical nature of New Zealand, but we also put our roading systems, our infrastructure systems along the same geography, which is also where we're going to continue to see slips. And that's the biggest one that GNS are focusing on at the moment, is the slips, because that's costly. Yeah. So revisit that. It's probably an antiquated, older approach, and things are happening more. So I think we've got to look at it. And that, I know DIA, we're having conversations with DIA about this as well, because, you know, at the end of the day, they're the lead agency when it comes to your bit of the business.
Thanks, John. It just seems to be there's so many silos of you've got to talk to the right person if you know who they are. And I know there will be very little money available post-election for anything or anywhere, and budgets will. Building a better resilience. We look at Gabrielle and the two discussion documents we had. We said we've had cyclone and we've got all these poor people over here that need helping, but the piece in the middle isn't really talked about. And we don't talk about the roads, the rivers, all the pieces in the middle. And if we could be more resilient, the issues downstream don't kind of happen. So that's the piece that interests me in the conversation. We may not have the money, but yeah, can we continue to advocate?
Yeah, I can say DPMC, because I sit on it, there's a national infrastructure group that's been set up. And I think what you'll see on the back of the bill becoming act will probably be another bill that will come forward around infrastructure and accountability on infrastructure. The failures that occur through commercial sector when incidents occur, there's no accountability on private sector who may be providing power and telco capability, but they're not required to actually step up and make sure that there's resilience in the system when something occurs.
Just last comment, if I, as the regulator at ECAN with responsibility to rivers, if I was the provider of those other services, how do I actually provide for them if I can't keep the bridges intact? So there's a real challenge for me in what those people can achieve. All the rules in the world don't necessarily give them anything if we can't keep the roads or the rail or the bridges open. So there's a horse and cart thing there.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the update. I'm looking forward to the A4 spreadsheet you're about to give us. It's got all the lists so we can actually run through and figure out how those numbers apply where we're at. Is that public available information that you've shared today? I didn't see it in our papers, but I'm quite keen to look at that further.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. It's that's provided to me by Professor Tom Wilson, who's our Chief Science Advisor for NEMA. I will check with him, but if it's okay with him, I think part of it, this is not trying to scare people. It's actually, as leaders, it's around making sure you're fully informed as to what, the risk is. Like I said, Lloyd's have already done the assessment of New Zealand. We're number 2 as a risk for them. This stuff is science-based. So I will double check with Tom Wilson, but I'll tell him that you asked for it, Sam, and I'm sure he'll.
Thank you. And it's often because we focus on the Alpine fault, but actually hearing the stuff that's for the rest of the country is quite interesting.
Yeah, the point, that's a really good point, because when the Hikurangi goes, you're going to have hundreds of thousands, probably 400,000 people displaced. So where do they displace to? And we saw a little bit of that in the Canterbury earthquakes, where displacement from Christchurch. And we are seriously talking to Australia at the moment around displacement, because to deal with that amount of death and that amount of serious injury, the health system won't be able to cope with it. Hence why we are doing the national plan or the national exercise to really test it, to sort of say, what would we do? And I was in Phuket when we had 5,000 dead people, and they had 230,000 from the Boxing Day tsunami. There's some real risks sitting here because our legislation doesn't enable us at the moment to deal with that amount of death in one place and injury. We'd have to be potentially surging off into Australia, and we've got to have those things in place.
The other piece for me is the nationally consistent platform and operating model. I think is really key. We've struggled to get a the sharing of library books across Greater Christchurch. Shifting platforms is really difficult for councils to do. How do you think it's going to go in the civil defence space, and how can you kind of make that stuff happen? Because it makes sense and totally back it, but in the end, there's costs that come for those that have to change. Is that all going to be expected to be funded locally, or is there national funding that's going to implement the changes that you want to see?
Look, we're putting up budget that's through our minister to try and get that in place. But look, what we do have is an intent and agreement from the CDEM group managers, including James, at the last CDEM group managers meeting, where they are committed to coming to a singular platform, and we will work with them to enable and support that, including a national one. Because you cannot have, group managers going from one part of the country to another to support it and struggling to be able to actually operate in the context of that environment because they don't know the systems and it's not adding value. So, yeah, there's an opportunity for us. We've got the intent. We will be working nationally to endeavour to put a budget. Well, yeah, we've gone to our minister with that as a requirement. The other thing, just so you know as well, we have got approval and we are building a national crisis management centre. Some of you have been to what was known as the bunker, which was the original basement in the beehive, and it is the foundation basement in the beehive. It's not fit for purpose. Any sort of decent event, it won't be able to function. So we're underway at the moment is a national crisis management centre, and we are currently working towards an alternative national crisis management centre, which will enable, you will need to have consistent technology in those places to be able to function, and also workforces. You've got to find 1,000 people to try and work in one of those environments, because you're not looking at a week or 2 weeks, you're looking at, a year, 2 years. Cyclone Gabriel, I think, brought the system to its knees, and if it had gone on a little bit further, it wouldn't have been able to cope. So there's a lot of redundancy and resilience within the system we need to work on. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. So that paper that Sam's asked for, which we could, if it's okay to get it distributed, could go to James, and James can distribute to the committee.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I'll just double check with our scientists and I'll come back to you. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Any further questions? And John.
Status of the bill once the House rises, does it die or does it have hope going forward? I'm just wondering, what is the actual process?
Yeah, it's obviously that slows down. It'll probably be, to be honest, midway through next year before it becomes an act. We're pretty confident that there have been, obviously it's that time of the year where any sort of political gains can be made with any sort of bill that's before Parliament, but across government there is agreement that this needs to be done. It's just depending on what the submissions will come out with, John. At the moment it was, in my words, a light touch. There might be something that comes out through the submissions, maybe from, and we've talked, Jamie, around, iwi maybe putting further submissions in. If that is the case, then I'll have to go back and do some rewrite, but it will get there. We are planning and hoping on, 8 months away.
James, could you comment on the submission that CDEM will be doing?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we will be doing a group submission on the bill. We'll be working through September to create that, and I've engaged with Simon Markham, who many of you will know, to do that work for us. Just working through at the moment how we actually sign off on that submission, and it might be a surprise for some of you, but what we're thinking of doing is using the policy forum that Hamish Dobby chairs, and then both the joint committee, Neil and Nigel, the Merrill Forum, to actually be the signatures on it. So I'll come out to you shortly with a proposal for how we'll do that, and then get Simon to do the engagement with all our councils in regard to what that submission looks like. But I'd also, certainly see individual councils doing submissions where you feel strongly about it. I think I don't want to go through the particular points today, but we've identified 4 or 5 points that we think are worth submitting on, and then also a submission on whether the light touch is actually enough. So we will definitely be back in touch very soon around that joint submission.
Any further questions for John or Michelle? No. Thank you. So we've got a motion there that we received the National Emergency Management Agency update. Move in a seconder. Dan and Phil. Put the motion, all in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Item 8.7, Controller and Recovery Manager appointments. page 96.
So I'm not going to read through all of these appointments. You can see that there's appointments there for local controllers, and there's a series of appointments for local recovery managers. There's short bios for each of those individuals, but I'm happy to take any questions on them. I suppose just the one thing to note, some of these controllers do need to undertake some controller training, and we've got some of that planned for them in late October.
Questions, James? Okay, and as the names are written in the agenda, yeah. Craig moved. Who seconded? Phil. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Next item is the 8.8 2021 flood recovery update. Richard or James? Richard.
I'll take the report as read, but just draw your attention to a couple of things. First, as has already been mentioned, with the roading group and the desire to have Whakamutunga get on board, and so that the communication of that is done nationally. At a local level, we've got a little bit of a pinch point just in terms of technical resource to get the GIS plumbing, for want of a better term, lined up. It seems that we're able to get the information from the districts, but it's just say there's a bit of technical work in the background required to bring that into a cohesive map that we can use locally. And related to that, also in terms of promoting that and making it publicly available, once we've got it working, we just want to probably take a couple of, or maybe 3 months, something like that, and make sure that it is being maintained, because the intention is that it's live 24 hours, 24/7. And if the data is not maintained, then we've got a problem. So before we make a big splash and say, here it is, we want to really make sure that it's robust and working. So just noting that the point that was raised earlier around it being adopted nationally and promoted nationally. The other thing, which is a cause for celebration, is yesterday we had a launch of the needs assessment tool that's been developed, and that's quite a significant milestone for us. It's something that has been worked on all over the country, and including nationally. And I think what we've developed at this point is probably leading the pack. So there's a survey that is hosted regionally, but every district can pick it up and deploy it in their region in an electronic format. So we're not reinventing all the questions, we're not photocopying things off and then having to enter the data. And importantly, also, there's a bit of automation that takes it from Survey 123 into our D4H platform for tasking. And that's always been a bit of a tricky issue without doing that manually. So that's now automated. Emergency managers seem to be pretty excited yesterday when we launched it. So we're happy and proud, and I congratulate the team who've been working on that. Yep, that's probably all I need to say at this point.
Any questions for Richard? And reiterate that Whakamutunga merging of information, so one source of truth. John.
The RAG group and the lifestyle block one, it's a conversation, or it's brought to my attention quite regularly out and about in the different spaces. So I know we're looking at potentially rewriting or utilising an Auckland lifestyle piece. Could just explain a little more on it, because it's something that wherever I go, I do get that thrown into the conversation when I say civil defence. Yes.
Yeah, so there's a book which is a reasonably substantial book. I'm not sure how many pages, but probably 1.5 centimetres thick, which is developed for lifestylers and what to do in an emergency. Our rural group who looked at that have actually decided that probably 2/3 or 3/4 maybe of that is actually about how to be a lifestyler, and rather than what to do in an emergency. So in taking that booklet, which I think there's an Auckland version, there's a Wellington version, there's a Southland version. We're doing two things. One is making sure it's relevant for us. The Auckland version talks about volcanic hazard. That's not really an issue for us. The Southland version is much closer to what our risks are. So we'll adapt it to our risks. And then also they're looking to actually take out a whole lot of the information about, as I say, you know, how to milk sheep or whatever you want to do, and just focus on the emergency management information. So it's a slimmed down version and available for lifestylers, and then that can be promoted through, you know, AMP shows or any other mechanisms.
Further questions? If not, there's a recommendation there that we receive the report. Move and second it. James and Nigel, Sam and Nigel. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. 8.9, the group controller report. Rich.
Thank you. I'll just once again take this as read, but I would like to highlight a couple of points. Firstly, point 2 there around EOC and ECC training. We've been struggling at just at the moment from a regional office point of view to provide enough training across the region. We are getting there with supporting the emergency managers to help with delivery and starting to engage with a few other contractors to help deliver that training. So just bear with the regional office while we get that training underway. I know, for example, Christchurch City Council want to do a significant amount of training, so we need to ramp up for that. And then just over towards the on the next page, point 9, just the resilience funding. We did get we had 3 applications in for resilience funding this year, NEMA resilience funding. 2 of those were successful. One is to continue our Lifeline resilience work that our Lifeline coordination group do. And the second one is to support an AF8 priority routes piece of work. So that's where we're supporting the AF8 project as the group that sponsors it. There was a piece of an application for the Ford's Work Viewer, which is a local government tool for working on infrastructure repairs and replacement in a coordinated way. That wasn't successful, but we know that some of you do use it. That wasn't successful. And then just over in the group office projects, particularly want to highlight there that we're doing some work about being able to come to council staff and doing a workshop with them to understand what tsunami means for Canterbury. It's all well and good seeing inundation lines on maps and things, but actually to have a chat with council staff around what it actually means from a response point of view, an evacuation point of view, and then particularly what it might mean afterwards, when people can't return to their houses. Just highlights the conversation that John's already talked about in regards to Hikarangi. Another piece is just working in that non-geographic vulnerable groups. Should the new bill come into place, this would already be supporting some changes there. But it's understanding that not all vulnerable groups sit in geographical locations. For example, those people that are English as a second language, other cultures, etc. So this piece of work will start to pick up what that means for them. And then through to exercise Pandora. We haven't had a Pandora for a long time. We keep having real events. But this time round, we have got Pandora planned for the 11th and 12th of October. We will be using a storm scenario that moves from the south-north, and so the south will exercise on the 11th of October, and the northern councils on the 12th, and the ECC more than likely to be active on both days. And then just lastly, Alpine fault planning. We do have a contractor starting to work on that now, currently sort of stock taking where everyone's at, including the work that territorial authorities have done. and that will also be lined up with some work that Gavin Treadgold from White Office is doing on a response framework. So more of that hazard agnostic responses. It's almost a little bit more like what NEMA is doing in that catastrophic planning space, but at a regional level. So they're the pieces that I'd like to highlight to you from my report.
Thanks, James. And on the exercise Pandora, the mayors will be invited to attend if they wish to, or take part, or whatever role they need to.
Yeah, I suspect there will be, we will drive in that a conversation around whether your local area needs to have a state of emergency declared for it. And if, that'll be a conversation with the mayors, and I'll probably have a conversation with Neil around a regional one, should we need a regional local state of emergency. And of course, your role as being a spokesperson for your council into your community alongside your controller, that is something that you could exercise, or we could exercise.
And we did discuss perhaps before the next civil defence meeting, or the one after, before the meeting, have a workshop for mayors on the role of the mayor in an emergency for us, so we know what we should be doing or not doing in that. So it might not be in, we're thinking the timing might be before this meeting, perhaps in the morning for an hour or two, whatever it would take. But I think the next meeting is not going to line up, which we'll get to shortly, but we will have one. Yeah. Any questions of James on this report? Nope. John moved. Nigel seconded that we received the civil defence, the CDEM Group Controllers report. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. So we'll move on now to the extraordinary item of business, and it is the financial report.
Firstly, my apologies for not including this in the report. It was a mistake on my behalf. Please note this is the fourth quarter report. It's not the end of financial year report, and it does have a couple of little things in it to be aware of. On the first page of the larger report, it shows a surplus deficit of 438k. But if you look at the graph showing the reserve balance, it shows just over $1 million. That's an anomaly of accounting. And when the final report comes out, we expect it to be about that $1 million per point for the reserve. So that actually indicated that we had a surplus through last year's activity. And I will update you on that as soon as we get the final annual reports through. But happy to take any questions on that fourth quarter financial report.
Questions? Looks in order. The reserves being built up. Wanted. Which is good. If not, there's a motion there that we receive the 2022-23 fourth quarter CDEM financial report. So we'd like to move. Craig Rowley. Craig Mackle. Motion, all in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. So that takes us on to the next meeting. And next meeting we need to work on, because I think the zone 5 and 6 is going to be in the Chatham Islands, which is the start of this week. So the mayors will be travelling back from the Chathams, all going to plan, which won't be leaving until 6 o'clock at night. So we're still yet to work out, but we may have the civil defence meeting by Zoom. Some people will be here, and the mayors may be on the Chatham Islands zooming in. We'll see whether that can work, or the signalling that may be the way we have the next meeting. And the Road Transport Committee meeting would probably be similar. So we worked on that to get the right outcome. So next meeting, closing Karakia. Jamie, please.
Kia ora tātou, nei rā te mihi kia koutou katoa, e o ko rangatira, tēnā koutou, whakakapi tō tātou hui e Karakia tēnei. Unu hia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairu e te ara takata, koia rā e rongo whakeiria, a ki runga kia tīna. Uie, tā e kia. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you all for your contribution, and I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you.